I tried to prank my friend with a killer clown costume, but I accidentally broke into the wrong apartment and got the cops called on me. About 2 years ago, a close friend of mine was going through a breakup, and I took it upon myself to go over to hers unannounced to cheer her up. I went to a costume shop and bought myself a scream mask, a fake knife, some fake blood, as well as a whitewashed clown costume. I went to her apartment, had her buzz me in, and once in the elevator I quickly changed into my costume. I reached her floor and saw that her door was very slightly open, so I kicked it hard. I walked in singing, "Hello, my baby," as loud as I could. After a few seconds of singing, however, I saw a woman who was not my friend. She began screaming, and a man stepped out of the bedroom. He ran to the kitchen and took out a hunting knife, then slowly started moving towards me. I turned around and sprinted back into the elevator. I started changing back into my regular outfit, and when I reached the bottom floor, I stepped outside carrying my bag. I saw 3 cop cars waiting. They spotted the fake blood I hadn't wiped off properly, and I heard one of them yell, "What's in the bag?" My heart sank. I had hoped the chaos would be over by now, but reality had other plans. One of the officers spotted me immediately and pointed with a sharp gesture. "Hey, stop right there!" I froze in place, my mind racing. I could see the officers approaching, their faces set in grim lines. There was no escape. "What's in that bag?" I said, one of them demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. I tried to explain, "It's just a costume," but the officer cut me off. "Step away from the bag, now." Panic surged through me. I slowly backed away, feeling like every step was a mile. The officer carefully unzipped the bag. As he pulled out the scream mask, fake knife, and clown costume, his eyes widened. He held each item up, the mask's grotesque expression, and the fake blood all too real in the harsh light of the street lamps. "What's this all about?" another officer asked, scrutinizing the fake blood on my clothes. "It's a prank," I blurted out. "I was trying to cheer up a friend. It went wrong. I didn't mean to scare anyone." I tried to make my voice sound as convincing as possible, but the officers weren't buying it. The lead officer, with a no-nonsense demeanor, said, "We're taking you in for questioning. Follow us." My legs felt like lead as I walked towards the squad car. Every step was heavy with dread. The officers flanked me, their serious expressions making the situation feel even more daunting. I tried to stay calm, but the fear of what might happen next was overwhelming. The drive to the police station was a blur of city lights and anxious thoughts. My mind raced through every possible scenario. What if they didn't believe me? What if this mistake ruined my life? I really couldn't believe I was caught up in this, all because I had decided to try to cheer up a friend in a really idiotic way. The moment I was pulled from the squad car and led into the police station, a sense of dread enveloped me. The building was cold and sterile. I was ushered into a small interrogation room, stark and unwelcoming. A metal table separated me from the officers who would soon question me. The chair was hard and uncomfortable, a reminder of the gravity of the situation. The lead officer, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, took a seat across from me. He had a permanent frown etched on his face. "Name, date of birth, address?" he asked, his tone clipped. I answered quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. The officer's eyes were hard, and he scribbled down my answers with a practiced hand. His disapproval was palpable, and I could feel the weight of his scrutiny. Another officer entered the room, carrying my bag. He placed it on the table, unzipping it with deliberate slowness. Out came the scream mask, the fake knife, and the whitewashed clown costume, all of which looked far more sinister under the harsh, fluorescent lights. "What's all this about?" the officer asked, holding up the mask with a look of disgust. "It's just a costume," I said, trying to explain. "I was trying to cheer up a friend. It was supposed to be funny, but I didn't realize anyone else would be there." The lead officer's gaze grew more skeptical. "Funny? You're telling me you thought running into someone's apartment dressed like this would be a joke?" I could see that they weren't buying it. The officer flipped through the items in the bag, shaking his head in disbelief. "You know how this looks, right? The fake blood, the knife. This isn't just some harmless prank." I tried to keep calm, my heart pounding. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to scare anyone. It was just supposed to be a joke for my friend." The lead officer's expression didn't change. He continued to ask questions, probing deeper into my intentions and actions. Each question felt like a blow, chipping away at my hope of quickly resolving the situation. I explained my side of the story repeatedly, but the officers seemed more interested in finding fault than in understanding the context. Eventually, a detective entered the room. He was dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase full of documents. He introduced himself and began his own round of questioning. His demeanor was even more intense than the initial officers. He had a sharp, analytical look, and he scrutinized every detail of my explanation. "We've reviewed the security footage," he said, his voice cold and professional. "It shows you in the costume, but it doesn't capture the full context. We need to understand understand why you thought this was a good idea. I repeated my story, trying to emphasize that my intentions were harmless. I just wanted to make my friend laugh. It was supposed to be a fun surprise. I had no idea anyone else would be in the apartment. The detective took notes, but didn't seem convinced. His questions became more pointed, digging into my character and past. He wanted to know if I had a history of similar behavior, if there was any reason I might act recklessly. The more I spoke, the more I felt like I was under a microscope. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. I was exhausted and emotionally drained. The detective finally stepped out to confer with the officers, leaving me alone in the stark room. The silence was oppressive, and my mind raced with anxiety and worry about what would happen next. The first few days after my arrest were a whirlwind. My lawyer, a tall, stern man with a serious demeanor, arrived to handle my case. He was the only beacon of hope amidst the chaos. He began by reviewing the evidence and gathering statements. He reached out to my friend, the intended recipient of the prank. She was hesitant to get involved, but after some convincing, she agreed to provide a statement. She described how I had planned the prank as a joke meant to lift her spirits. She confirmed that there was no malicious intent, and her statement became a key piece of my defense. My lawyer also requested the building's security footage. He hoped that the footage would show the context of the situation, indicating that my actions were not intended to be harmful. However, the footage was grainy and didn't capture the full scene. The visual evidence was limited, and it became clear that proving my innocence would be an uphill battle. Throughout this period, I was held in a holding cell. The room was small and cold, with a cot and a toilet. I spent most of my time pacing or sitting quietly, my thoughts consumed by worry. I had no idea how long this would last or what the outcome would be. Every day felt like an eternity. My lawyer continued to work on my defense. He interviewed the responding officers and other witnesses, trying to piece together a comprehensive account of the incident. He aimed to show that while my prank had gone wrong, it was not intended to cause real harm. Despite these efforts, the situation felt increasingly dire. The authorities seemed focused on the potential danger rather than the context of the prank. My lawyer's attempts to convince them otherwise felt like they were falling on deaf ears. The stress of waiting for updates was overwhelming, and each day added to my sense of dread. The trial was a spectacle of tension and drama. The courtroom was packed with spectators, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. As I walked in, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. The room was filled with murmurs, the clinking of metal, and the shuffling of papers. The prosecution presented their case first. The prosecutor, a man with a commanding presence and a sharp suit, laid out their argument with dramatic flair. He painted a vivid picture of the chaos my prank had caused. He showed photos and video clips, emphasizing the distress and fear experienced by the occupants of the apartment building. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said, his voice booming, "what we have here is a clear case of reckless endangerment. This defendant's actions, though masked as a prank, were a serious threat to public safety. His portrayal of the event made my actions seem far more sinister than I had ever intended. He described the fake blood and the frightening costume in detail, making it sound like a deliberate attempt to cause harm. The prosecutor's rhetoric painted a bleak picture, and it was clear that he was determined to make an example of me. When my lawyer's turn came, he fought hard to counter the prosecution's claims. He presented the security footage, pointing out that while it showed me in the costume, it did not capture the full context or intent behind my actions. He argued that my prank was meant to be harmless, and that the distress caused was an unintended consequence. My friend took the stand next. Her testimony was crucial in conveying my intentions. She described how the prank was meant to be a light-hearted joke, not a dangerous act. She spoke about our friendship and how I had only wanted to cheer her up. Despite my lawyer's best efforts, the courtroom remained tense. The prosecution's portrayal had a significant impact, and it felt like the jury was swayed by their dramatic presentation. The judge listened carefully, but seemed unmoved by the arguments presented. The waiting for the verdict was agonizing. Each moment stretched on as I tried to stay hopeful. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with anticipation. The judge finally delivered the verdict, and my heart sank as the words "guilty" echoed through the room. The judge explained that while my intentions might have been innocent, the potential consequences of my actions warranted a serious response, and I was given 18 months in prison. The transition to jail life was jarring. I was moved to a cell block with other inmates, each with their own stories and backgrounds. The environment was harsh and unforgiving. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, and the rigid schedule took a toll on me. The daily routine was monotonous and rigid. I woke up early, followed a set schedule, and completed assigned tasks. The days blended blended together, each one feeling like a repetition of the last. I tried to keep a low profile and focus on making the best of the situation. The lack of privacy and the harsh environment were constant sources of stress. I spent most of my time in my cell, reflecting on my mistakes and trying to stay positive. The inmates around me had their own issues, and the interactions were often tense. In the jail's common area, I sat at a long table with a few other inmates. The room was harshly lit, and the air was thick with tension. Most of the men around me had faces that told stories of serious crimes and long sentences. I felt like an outsider, out of place in a world I never intended to enter. A large, burly man with tattoos covering his arms and a deep scar across his cheek glanced over at me. He was chatting with a group about his experiences in prison, his voice loud and confident. When the conversation shifted to me, his attention sharpened. "So, what's your deal?" he asked, his tone blunt and curious. I told him about the prank that had landed me here, how I had dressed up as a killer clown to surprise my friend, and how it had gone horribly wrong. The room went quiet as the inmates took in my story. The man shook his head, his expression a mix of amusement and annoyance. "Seriously? You're in here for a dumb clown prank? Man, you must be the biggest idiot ever. This place is for people who've done real time, not for guys who get locked up for making a mess with a costume." His words hit me hard. As the other inmates murmured in agreement, I felt a deep sinking feeling. I didn't belong here among these hardened criminals. My stupid mistake had landed me in a nightmare that felt like it was way beyond anything I could handle. That was exactly how I learned quickly that staying out of trouble and keeping my mouth shut was essential for maintaining a sense of normalcy. One of the most jarring experiences was coming face to face with the two people who had been affected by my prank. They were in the same facility, and I had to interact with them during group activities and meals. The confrontation was intense, and I could see the pain and anger in their eyes. They made it clear that my actions had deeply impacted them, and it was a harsh reminder of the consequences of my behavior. When my sentence was finally over, I was eager to start fresh. Reintegrating into society was a slow and challenging process. I focused on repairing relationships and finding a job. My friend, who had been supportive throughout, helped me reconnect with others and rebuild my life. Adjusting to life outside was difficult. The experience of being in jail had left a mark, and I had to work hard to prove that I had changed. I found a job and began to rebuild my life, focusing on making positive changes and staying out of trouble. The lessons learned from the experience were profound. I realized the importance of considering the consequences of my actions and the impact they could have on others. I worked to make amends and focused on building a better future for myself. The road to recovery was long, but I was determined to move forward and make the most of my second chance.